This mini won me first place in a miniature painting competition, but don't let that fool you. I'm not an artistic genius, I've only been in the hobby for a few months, so let's dive in and see how this happened. Today's video isn't about showing off a flawless piece or how to win your next competition with zero skills. I'll be breaking down my process, but most importantly, I'll be focusing on the mistakes that I made that hopefully you can learn from as well. This competition was organized by Dungeons & Dice Manchester, a free society that runs weekly TTRPG meetups as well as DM and painting workshops. This year's model was a satyr kindly 3D printed by one of the members. This gives everyone the same starting point. Judging is based on overall paint job, technique, and creativity. And that's pretty much it. No overly complicated rules. Obviously, I tried to do some research before starting painting, and I spent a lot of time thinking and pondering things through. I like to call this productive procrastination, and I think I've gotten pretty good at it. I worked on the miniature over multiple spaced out sessions, which for me allows me to build some confidence when I actually go and make changes. The original print came with its own base, which I really liked. However, since I had never done my own before, I wanted to challenge myself. I still ended up using it as a reference for my own base anyway. My main idea was to create a gory hellscape where I would use this bird, which I think it's a vulture, and that I got from a Warhammer sprue. Maybe it would be eating a dead animal, or it could be perched on a shoulder. I realized there wasn't enough space on the shoulder to place it in a natural way, and if I was to add it to the base, I would be making not only too much work for myself, but also turning the miniature into a full diorama. I ended up using a single skull instead, which still gives the idea of a darker atmosphere. I also wanted to chop off Naked Nigel's head. By the way, meet Naked Nigel, and attach it to the tip of the spear as if it had been freshly cut and spiked to send a message to the enemy. Oh, mistake number 1. I cut the head off with a godhand nipper, which I came to realize has very fragile, thin blades, so I really should have just used a cheap one. It took a bit of back and forth to get the head positioned in the spike. I dug a hole through the neck while also sanding it down, plus cutting the tip of the spear off for a better fit. Mistake number 2. I used the tip of the nipper to cut the spear. Again, the blades are quite thin, and if you have the space, use the innermost part of the blade for making these type of cuts. Mistake numero 3. Maybe I'm just ignorant, or maybe I just have 2 working brain cells, but I kept trying to use my Tamiya sprue glue as usual, and it wasn't melting the parts together. That's obviously because this is a plastic glue with plastic sprue bits inside it, and the model was printed in resin. Resin is technically a plastic, but not all plastics are resins. I'm sure I'll end up in an internet rabbit hole and trying to find out more about this sometime. But yeah, thankfully, the super glue did the job. Which brings me to mistake number 4. As the tidy person I am, I got super glue all over my hands and subsequently on Nigel's head. And this ended up melting through it and deforming the side a bit. The silver lining is it actually worked perfect for my concept, looking like a bruise or a wound from the battle, potentially from the head falling on that side. I spent a few days scavenging for basing materials during my commute to work, and thankfully in the UK it's pretty easy to find bits of bark in local parks or along trails. I also picked up some cork pieces, in this case battlefield rocks from the army painter, to add some size variety. Mistake number 5. This one's more annoying than major. I added a top layer of sand without putting the sand container underneath it, and that caused not only unnecessary mess on my desk, but it's also a waste of sand. Bonus mistake, I used way too much PVA glue here. I did use less glue here and there to cover up some empty spaces and make the rock formation more uniform by adding sand to those areas. Finally, I sealed the whole thing with a thinner layer of PVA glue. I got these skulls from Citadel. I think they're actually okay for the price, considering how many you get, and obviously you're getting that high quality plastic that GW is known for. After priming, I had another mishap with the figure where the spear snapped off. Not the end of the world though, and actually I did use it to my advantage when painting Nigel's face. The recipe here was burnt red with ice yellow. On the darker side of the face, I accentuated the smudges with dried blood. I went a bit rogue with it, adding some to the ears, a bit on the forehead, and on the cheek. It may seem counterproductive, but the next thing I painted was the skull on the base. I knew maybe I wouldn't be able to reach some of the areas in it with the mini glued on, and it was also another face to practice on, just without the flesh and all that. I primed the base with dark rust. I was envisioning a fiery or bloody tone, so I wanted to add a warmer shade. I found gory red, which is the perfect name for this paint, and then I dry brushed the base with ice yellow. I also dry brushed with a lighter color on top for the higher parts that had more light hitting on it. Before gluing the satyr to the base, I made sure I knew exactly where the feet were going and that it looked natural. Remember this guy? Well, his headless life still had a purpose. I put together a few paints that I wanted to try for the satyr's body, focusing on brown and red tones. I first tried a devil skin idea, but I accidentally made him look like an open wound, and yeah, I tried a few other things as well. I definitely recommend you getting a mini like this where you can practice your anatomy painting, but also trying like different skin tones and not be afraid to fail because that's what it's for. Finally, I moved on to the satyr's face. I started with the base coat of dark rust mixed with a bit of red. For highlights, I used sunny skin tone, and from there I focused on building up the face, keeping in mind that one side would catch most of the light, so that was my focus. When I started painting the torso, I tried my best not to paint each muscle like a lonely island, but I didn't get enough shadow transitions on the bottom part of each muscle, so it kinda looks like I painted some lines between each ab. I still have a lot to learn about volumetric highlighting, and it's just going to take me a lot more practicing. I added more and more skin tone to add brightness by sketching where the brightest spot would be and then blending it all in. Again, it's another technique that I will improve on with time. The reference pictures I took were definitely a lifesaver, but I hope I can one day be less reliant on them. For now though, it is the best way to learn. I wasn't super happy with the first pass, but I knew I could come back to it later. Moving on to the fur, I started by covering the legs with sunburst ochre, and this is going to bring me to mistake number 6. I put on a very thick layer of this paint, clogging up some details, and when I finally went to dry brush it, it just wasn't looking good. I don't know if it's a skill issue or if by default this wasn't the best technique to use, since when fur is modeled in 3D it tends to look clumpy, so it's not super realistic to begin with. I used a wet Q-tip and managed to clean up most of what I'd done. I decided to start a bit darker this time to give me more room for building up different tones, and just by using the tip of the brush I tried to draw in different strands where it felt natural, making sure the paint itself is the perfect consistency, not too thick, not too watery. I took my time with it, and I did enjoy this a lot more as I could see the results coming to life, and I had all the control I wanted, so I could have a bigger amount of lighter strands at the top where the light was hitting the most. I had previously painted the scarf with red, and now I wanted to add some purple magenta highlights. Mistake number 7. Since I did these 2 steps at different times, it meant that the base coat was completely dry and I also wasn't sure which paint I had used before. So I struggled to paint up smooth transitions. I tried to fix them with glazing, but it wasn't quite as tidy as I wanted it. For horns and bony bits, I tend to go with a brown-green base and then adding deck tan or ice yellow or even ivory. At the moment, it's a very straightforward process for me. Similarly, with the hair, as long as you know a color recipe that works, you don't need to overthink it too much. Before moving on to the spear, I took some time to clean up the torso and other areas that stood out. In my beginner opinion, this stage, refining details, glazing, blending for consistency, is the most important part of any paint job. Don't be afraid of mistakes, they're how you learn. Even if you are following a tutorial, you won't get everything right on the first try, and that's okay. Your style and your own technique are what makes your miniature unique, and I think that's one of my favorite parts about this hobby. Alright, let's wrap things up with something exciting. NMM. My reference was actually a drawing since I liked how it clearly showed color transitions. I chose a dark reddish tone for the base, then I layered in a darker yellow to start building a golden shine, followed by a brighter, whiter yellow, on key shapes like the spear tips and the middle of the reflections. I had 2 main light sources, so those were my focal points for highlights. To finish it off, I went a little wild with dried blood again. Sorry, not sorry, thinking about where it would realistically land and why. For example, I added some to the satyr's hands, imagining they threw punches, maybe even took Nigel's eyes out. Sorry, Nigel. I might have gone overboard and covered up details I spent ages painting, but I'd rather paint them well first and cover them later than plan everything around where the blood splatters are coming from the start. It's good to have a good look again and figure out what's missing. For me, I thought the base needed a bit more contrast. I did another dry brushing pass with ice yellow and I wanted to try and put a wash on top of it. Mistake number 8. For some reason, I thought adding a bit of glaze medium to a large amount of paint immediately makes it see-through. I didn't do a test on my skin, for example. I just went with the brush straight on and soon found out that I was once again covering up most of what I'd done with the dry brush. So I repeated that step once again. To help with giving the base more contrast, I used a couple of pigments. Charcoal for the shadows and red iron to highlight the rest. Trying to actually be tidy this time, I picked up a small makeup brush, covered it lightly with charcoal and tapped a few places where shadow would be, particularly the very middle where the satyr is standing and some recesses in the rocks. The red iron actually gave me the brightness that I was looking for. I could have done a lot of things differently, but I think I tackled this project with some sort of plan. It's just the execution that's obviously far from a golden demon level. The only thing I know for sure is that if I was to do it again, I would do it better and hopefully I would make more mistakes that I could learn from. I was also lucky enough to enter a competition with low stakes, not with hundreds or thousands of participants, and with people that were on the same level of experience as myself. So I felt encouraged to push myself without the fear of looking like a noob. And if you want to join a competition that you think is out of your league, I say just do it anyway. You'll find so much joy and community and inspiration from other fellow hobbyists. I couldn't end the video without showing the awesome work from some of the other contestants. I absolutely love seeing everyone's creativity and passion for the hobby. They make me want to try new things. Thank you again to D&D Manchester. I got this little pin which I'll cherish forever, and a voucher which I got a new D20 with, so that's pretty cool. I'm actually thinking of entering another competition soon. The deadline is in August, so to decide what I'm painting next, I got a few Dungeons and Laser boxes together, and it turns out that this is what I'm doing next. Look at it, it's a demonic tree. So if you want to see that, don't forget to subscribe, like the video, and if you've gotten to this part of the video so far, type "Save Nigel" in the comments, because poor guy, he
sacrificed himself for art, and yeah, thank you, Nigel. He's a good guy. And I just keep like destroying him and painting him up, and one day Nigel will be free.
But not today. I'm Mars, this is Roll for Paint, and I'll see you in the next one.